there! November in the form of every Republican candidate who associates himself or herself with Donald Trump's name-calling, which seems to focus most intensely and most frequently on women who challenge him or threaten him or, heaven forbid, insult him. Today's installment of Donald Trump's denigration of women came in the form of a tweet about Stormy Daniels. The president tweeting this, quote, "Federal judge throws out Stormy Daniels' lawsuit versus Trump. Trump is entitled to full legal fees." At Fox News, great. Now I can go after Horseface and her third-rate lawyer in the great state of Texas. She will confirm the letter she signed. She knows nothing about me. A total con. Horseface. The President of the United States called a woman with whom he had an alleged sexual relationship Horseface. Unfortunately, it's the kind of insult, personal, childish, and mean, that people have become so accustomed to with this president that it barely registers as news. But it renders the First Lady's Be Best campaign, an anti-bullying effort, pointless and satirical, and Ivanka Trump's stated mission of being some sort of ambassador for women, a pointless joke. How can these women and any woman in the White House pretend that they work for anyone other than a very loudmouthed and very thin-skinned bully? It also shows that bashing women, even a woman who's an alleged victim of sexual assault, is more than a quirk to Trump's personality. It's a political strategy that he thinks is a winning.
Professor Blasey Ford got before the Senate and was asked, what's the worst moment? And she said, when the two boys laughed at me, at my expense. And then I watched you mimic her, and thousands of people were laughing at her.
They can do what I will tell you, the way now Justice Kavanaugh was treated has become a big factor in the midterms. Have you seen what's gone on with the polls?
Do you think you treated her with great respect?
I think so, yeah, I did.
But you seem to be saying that she lied.
You know what? I'm not going to get into it because we won. It doesn't matter.
Well,
we won.
The Washington Post's Ashley Parker tweets this today. The real question, or my question at least, is if any Republican voters penalized Trump this November for using language like this to denigrate a woman who accused him of an extramarital affair. This is the kind of language that has come to define Trump's presidency and his party, which elected and continues to support and cheer a man whose public insults of women have included Miss Piggy, Miss Housekeeping, degenerate, slob, pig, bleeding very badly from a facelift, not my first choice, low IQ, wacky, and of course, look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Here to discuss the day's developments and Donald Trump's brazen return to Twitter tirade, some of our favorite reporters and friends. From the Washington Post, White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker. Here with us on set, Emily Jane Fox, senior reporter with Vanity Fair. Elise Jordan, former aide in the George W. Bush White House and State Departments, now co-host of the fabulous must-listen podcast, Words Matter. Presidential historian and author Doris Kearns Goodwin. Her new book is Leadership in Turbulent Times, and if these aren't they, I don't know what they are. And in Florida, David Jolly, former Republican congressman who is no longer affiliated with the Republican Party. Just in time, we'll get to that. Let me start with you, Phil Rucker. What brought the president back to Twitter, and why did he go there with Horseface? Does it have anything to do with the insults that Stormy Daniels had for him?
Well, it just may, Nicole. Excerpts from Stormy Daniels' book that's due out this fall came out a week or two ago, and she's apparently describes the president's manhood in pretty graphic detail in that book. I'm sure the president's aware of that, and it may have gotten under his skin. But look, he had a lot of time this morning, free time. There is not a single meeting on the president's public schedule today. No daily intelligence briefing, no public events, no meetings that have been publicly announced. We know he spent a chunk of the morning up in the residence of the White House watching Fox News. He had a number of tweets this morning. After a real stretch here where he was pretty careful and disciplined on Twitter, which is unusual. Back in the fray today, going after not just Stormy Daniels but Elizabeth Warren with 3 different tweets about Pocahontas. he's feeling a real pep in his step, the president is. He feels like he's had a victory with Kavanaugh, that the crowds are big at his rallies. He feels encouraged about the midterm elections, and it's one of the reasons he's been talking to reporters so frequently, because he feels really emboldened in this particular moment. But as we saw today, he is kind of letting his views fly with the Stormy Daniels insult that is sure to alienate a lot of voters out there.
But Rupert, does the White House ever feel, do they have a capacity for shame? Is there any, and I guess by that I mean, is there any awareness, any self-awareness that the First Lady, really her only public venture is this anti-bullying campaign called Be Best? I don't think I'm missing a word there. I think that's its name. And Ivanka, the brand, if you will, I think she still thinks of herself, and I'll excuse my way in, as a brand that caters to and focuses on women and the empowerment of women. I mean, is irony dead at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Well, most of the people who work for President Trump understand the irony and they see what's going on here. But does the president feel any shame? Absolutely not. He's somebody who has no shame. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why he gets into the mud pit with these fights and will just take it lower and lower and lower, because he doesn't feel shame, he doesn't feel embarrassed. And I think he feels like this is central and core to his political brand, his personal brand, and it's one of the reasons he's such a draw, one of the reasons why he thinks so many of his devotees stay devoted to him.
So let's I'm embarrassed to do this with you here, but we have to do this. This is not about a lawsuit. This is not about policy. This is not about respecting the women in your life enough to not totally debase and render meaningless their initiatives. In Melania Trump's case, the Be Best anti-bullying campaign. In Ivanka's case, women's empowerment, or whatever her amorphous mission is in the West Wing. This is about someone who insulted the president's body, and I'm guessing he associates very closely with his ego.
Sure. I mean, this is stripping a very part of everything that could make him feel like a man and make him feel powerful, and that is probably one of the worst things you could do to a man like Donald Trump. It's interesting. There are people in the White House, women often in the White House, who do not challenge him are treated better than the men in the White House. You see that with Ivanka Trump. You saw that with Hope Hicks. You saw that last week when Nikki Haley stepped down from her job. No one got that kind of treatment when they stepped down from a job. You saw that with Dina Powell, who would have likely been welcomed back with open arms. But women who challenge him are debased, degraded, and treated subhuman. They are compared to animals all the time, and it's just, this is the language that comes out of our White House. I know that we shouldn't be surprised. This happens time and time again, not just with women, with men too. This is how he talks about everybody, but it is just striking at this very critical moment where a journalist has likely been murdered by someone, a royal family who he has embraced and his son-in-law has very personally embraced. But this is what he's spending his time doing.
My colleague Daphne Lindsay said as I was walking up here, it's amazing to look at just a time capsule of the Trump presidency where he has kinder things to say about MBS, who likely knew about or oversaw an operation where a U.S. resident, a Washington Post columnist, was not just murdered, but likely dismembered, according to the Turkish officials. And he has nicer things to say about the Saudi ruling family than he does about a woman in America.
Donald Trump relates to despots. He relates to their ruthlessness, their ultimate power. It's something that he is consistently envious of. And just to go back to something Emily said, I think it's good that we are still shocked and that we are absolutely appalled, because this should never be normal behavior. And it's not behavior that I would tolerate among a family member. It's not behavior I would tolerate in the workplace. And so why do we have to tolerate this horrible standard coming from the commander-in-chief?
David Jolly, I called a couple folks, friends of the president, who don't hesitate to say that his conduct is appalling, but they chuckle and guffaw, and they say, well, he thinks the Kavanaugh thing worked for him. Where is the line, or are there no more lines, when any sort of decent person steps away and says, you know what, I don't just have daughters who are watching men and women in the workplace, who are aware of the media. I have sons, and I have sons who just may model the behavior of the most powerful man in the world and call someone in their class horseface and get suspended. So I better step away from this kind of behavior. When will somebody do that?
Well, and I appreciate in your opening comments, you said neither men nor women are willing to call him out on this, because the truth is within the Republican Party, there are no voices that will speak back to the president. Look, foundationally, we know this was the boorish, disgusting behavior of a man with anger and hate in his heart. But you also have to look at the political strategy that you question around this. The first strategy would have been to say nothing. This case, in fact, vindicated Donald Trump in a way and suggested that Avenatti had filed what I've said from the beginning on the defamation case was a frivolous suit. And I think there are hard questions for Avenatti. Did he take advantage of Stormy Daniels in pushing her down this road where now she and Avenatti are financially on the hook for having lost this civil case? But the second political strategy would have been, if you're going to attack Avenatti. Don't attack Stormy Daniels. But what we see in his attacks on Stormy Daniels is at the heart of your very question, which this is a man who has a history replete with attacking women and women who challenge him. It is a reflection of his own leadership, and at some point, and I believe we have crossed that line, it's a reflection of Trump's Republican Party today as well.
Doris, is there any example of a president showcasing his denigration of women, his misogyny, if you will, like Donald Trump?
I mean, I can't think of another time like this, really, when there's an indignity every day. It's not even that we've reached the bottom, we're swimming at the bottom. And the thing that's inexplicable about President Trump is, at a moment of victory, it was a victory for him today, right? Just as the Kavanaugh confirmation was a victory. Why not be able to feel exhilarated about that and reach out to the other side? In the Kavanaugh, he just went after her. He went after the Democrats. He said they were horrible, horrible people. It was all a hoax. Today, he could have just said, I was right. This is a victory. Instead, he had to go after her again, the woman again. And there's almost as if there's no joy in this man, no joy in the office, in the fulfillment of the office. It's only in the fighting against somebody. That's when his adrenaline comes up. And how can you be a president and not get the joy in the office, the fulfillment of what you're doing? And there's something missing there. There's something going on there. And I think as far as the country goes, we have to understand, where's our identity as a country right now? Things are happening, just as you, Emily said, around the world. And this is what we're forced to talk about because he set the bar. He made us talk about this.
And there's so many examples where we come on the air on a day when there are far more important things happening. But this show, more than we Deadline White House. We have to cover this White House, so we have to cover what the president does. And this is what he did today. Has there been any example in the history of our country of a president who doesn't accept the role of head of our state?
And who doesn't understand that the president sets an example for everybody. It's the most, Teddy Roosevelt said, the most important thing a president can do is set an example for his countrymen. And not an example of just winning with your party, but pulling the country together and healing the divisions. I don't know that I've seen somebody intentionally do that before. I mean, it happens. Some of them have divided the country. But to want to do it because you win by doing it. You know, when he was asked about the mocking of Dr. Ford, and he said, it's over. I won. I mean, winning is all that matters. It's when both sides win that matter. That's what a deal is. A deal is a square deal for the rich and the poor. It's not a deal where it's pure nonsense unless he wins. We've got to think about temperament. I mean, temperament came up in the campaign and then it floated away in the campaign. It's still the most important. Temperament and character, what we need to look for in a leader.
Phil Rucker, the polls are not good for Donald Trump, despite the fake polls that he tweets about. Among women, I believe among independents, more than 60% of independent women who usually determine the outcome of elections. They are the largest group, I think, of swing voters. 63% favor Democrats, 62% favor Democrats. What does this White House worry about, if anything, with the president turning harsher rhetoric on women, people that he, you know, his own constituents, than he does for dictators and authoritarian leaders like MBS?
Well, there is, by the way, concern in the White House and, frankly, within the Republican Party about the polls showing this huge gender gap heading into the midterm elections, especially when it comes to the battle to keep control of the House of Representatives, where so many of those districts are playing out in suburban areas. But what the president's trying to do politically is it's a base strategy. He's trying to give his core, loyal, diehard base supporters, the people that will stick with him if he shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue, as he has famously said, to give them a reason to stay energized, to be galvanized, and to turn out and vote in 3 weeks. And I think it's one of the reasons why you see him using this really divisive language, whether it's talking about Elizabeth Warren and calling her a fraud and a phony and Pocahontas, or going after Stormy Daniels by calling her horseface because she's an opponent of his in terms of the legal lawsuit. He's trying to give, create a common enemy among his supporters. And in terms of whether these voters are ever going to pull away from him, he's had this kind of language for years, and he's not faced the political consequences. He made fun of Carly Fiorina's face, and he still won the Republican nomination. He had the Access Hollywood video and made fun of Alicia Machado for gaining weight, and he still won the presidency. And so I'm not sure that this is going to be any different.
I guess the only thing I'd add is he didn't think he was going to win the presidency. He made those comments, and he was so uncertain of his margin of victory that he did not draft a victory speech. He did not contemplate the possibility.
Yeah,
so
Nicole,
it wasn't like he won by a lot.
No, and we should remind people that Hillary Clinton actually had 3 million more votes in the popular vote than he did. He won the Electoral College, but more Americans voted for Hillary Clinton.
And we should let him go on thinking that misogyny is a good strategy. I'm sure most Democrats would like that. And Elise, it may be paying dividends. This is from the Washington Post today. Like the conservative Tea Party groups that rose up after Barack Obama was elected president in 2008 and that helped Republicans retake the House and gain power in state legislatures in 2010. This new liberal movement has emerged largely outside the traditional party structure. It is led by hundreds of thousands of mostly white, college-educated, middle-aged women who trace their inspiration to the inaugural women's marches in January 2017 and whose ambitions have only grown amid a succession of disagreements with Trump, including over the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That movement, the size and the electoral relevance of that group will be tested in the midterm.
And it's a blue wave that certainly seems likely to be successful in the House of Representatives in suburban districts among college-educated women. The question is, the Senate is such an impossible map, and in these red states where the Kavanaugh fight played very differently than it did among educated suburban women.
Phil Rucker, is there any plan to get Melania Trump or Ivanka Trump on the campaign trail to help maybe stem the bleeding among this group of independent women voters?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any campaign blitz that either is planning to do. I'd be very surprised if the First Lady hit the campaign trail. Ivanka Trump has had a series of events the last several months where she'll talk about sort of economic development issues or women's issues in some of these suburban areas, but they're not explicit campaign appearances. She's not headlining rallies, for example, or going door-to-door or stumping with individual candidates. Perhaps she'll do that in the final days, but I'm not aware of a plan, and I frankly would be surprised if she did.
All right, I'm going to give the last word in this block to Stormy Daniels, who responded to the horse-faced insult with this tweet. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present your president. In addition to his shortcomings, he has demonstrated his incompetence, hatred of women, and lack of self-control on Twitter again, and perhaps a penchant for bestiality. Game on, Tiny. Requires no analysis or comment, and I love these guests too much to make them do that. Phil Rucker, thank you for spending some time with us. When we come back, the president's former fixer and personal lawyer is repenting for his work for Trump by talking to Robert Mueller, and by registering as a Democrat just in time for the midterms. We'll talk to one of the reporters who knows him best about his make good strategy. Also ahead, Donald Trump continues to sow the Saudi line on the disappearance of that Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. What's behind the use of the two-track presidency in this situation? We'll go behind the Trump-Kushner-Saudi ties that may help explain their very close relationship. And a former director of the CIA weighs in on America's standing in the world as the president continues to trust the word of the world's autocrats and dictators over his very own intelligence community. John Brennan weighs in. All that coming up. Central to the Stormy Daniels saga we've been talking about is the president's former fixer, Michael Cohen, who claims to have arranged at Donald Trump's direction the hush money payment to Daniels. He now appears to be trying to transform himself from villain to hero. Cohen is the latest member of the former Republicans Club. He's a registered Democrat now, and here's his message. Quote, the midterm elections 2018 might be the most important vote in our lifetime. Get out the vote. Vote November 6th. And while Cohen's transformation has certainly been political, it's seems to be personal as well. New reporting from our friend Emily Jane Fox in Vanity Fair. Quote, Cohen has said to friends that he has regrets about his work on behalf of Trump in his capacity as a Trump Organization employee. What you see now is a return to who he was before all of this, one longtime friend of his told me. He's an open book, and he's adamant to make it right. Joining our conversation is Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast. Emily, I want to start with you. Take us through your reporting, your latest reporting on Michael Cohen.
So Michael Cohen has said that he has re-registered as a Democrat. Now, I will say he has been a Democrat his entire life. He only switched party affiliations in 2017 when Steve Wynn, who was the RNC finance chair, said, you are the deputy finance chair of the RNC. You can't be registered as a Democrat. So he made a brief switch. And look, the president's a Democrat. His children who serve in the White House are Democrats as well. What's going on with Cohen is he has spent upwards of 50 hours talking with investigators and sharing everything he knows, not only to the special counsel's office, but to investigators in the Southern District of New York and also the state of New York who are looking into Trump Foundation activities. So this is someone who once told me that he would take a bullet for the president and is now spending as many hours as he can with investigators ensuring that they know everything that he knows about the president and his business activities and his personal behavior as well.
There's a good point. I mean, Donald Trump, too, was a Democrat. As he demolishes the Republican Party, David Jolly and I usually have to remind ourselves that Trump wasn't in the party when we were. But he seems to be trolling Trump politically by getting out the vote for Democrats in 3 weeks.
You have to understand, Cohen can't really speak publicly much because he's waiting to be sentenced in December. So there are little ways that I think make him feel a little bit in control, and what he's saying privately to people, which is that he has absolutely no taste for anyone with the last name Trump anymore. Those subtle little digs that he's able to say on Twitter or perhaps spin himself in a more positive light, he's going to take every opportunity to do just that.
So Michael Cohen joins David Jolly in the former Republicans Club. You made it public, made it official that you've left the party. You want to talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure, probably a very different journey than Michael Cohen.
I'm guessing.
The Republican Party, listen, I've been a member of the Republican Party since I was old enough to register to vote. Obviously, 3 years ago, with many Americans, I took to the House floor as a sitting member of Congress, called on Donald Trump to drop out, and have stayed on that message that I believe he's wrong for the country and wrong for the party. Nicole, the inflection point for both my wife and I, we both left the party, was when we found out we were expecting our first child. And obviously, you begin to study your associations a little differently. For us, obviously, it was the imprint of Donald Trump on the Republican Party, what we talked about in the first segment, these flirtations with misogyny, with race baiting, a man of vacuous ideology, little conviction, the tone he has set for the party. But it's greater than Donald Trump as well. Look, the GOP orthodoxy has gone so far astray from the Jack Kemp days when I joined the party, where we embraced this notion of equality of opportunity for all people. And based on that foundation, we suggested rolling back interference from government. Well, what we did in moving to a less government party is we actually introduced all the proper tools that government can deploy to empower people, particularly communities that are less fortunate. We have contributed as Republicans to an economic disparity, to an education disparity, frankly, to a cultural disparity among many of our communities. What I didn't anticipate in leaving the party, though, which I really find relief in right now, is the rejection of partisanship. We are living in such a hyper-partisan world, and there are roles for parties, certainly we know that. But look, from George Washington warning against factions to Barack Obama begging to get us to a post-partisan world, we're not there yet. And so maybe in an independent lane, I can contribute to that. I will say this. I did stay and fight for 3 years, and a lot of people have said, what took you so long? I want our daughter to know that her mom and I stood and fought for 3 years for something we believed in, that the Republican Party could listen to better angels. But I also want our daughter to know, perhaps through our example, that there are fights at times that wiser women and men walk away from. And this is a fight that I've chosen to walk away from. There are others that can fight for the dignity of the Republican Party. I'm excited about what the future holds as an independent.
Do you feel sad? I feel unmoored. I feel cheered when people say to me, "You're my favorite Republican," and I know it's intended as a compliment, but it feels like a lonely island that about a minivan full of us are lampooned on.
Yeah, not only is it, look, it's lonely, but at the same time, I know that I've disappointed former supporters of mine, Republicans who gave of their time and their talent and their money to support me, who are now disappointed in me. And so I didn't make a grand announcement. We did this very quietly, specifically because I didn't want to throw sand in the face of those who had worked hard on my behalf. You know, but going back to having a child and what my wife recently said to me, she said she didn't feel like she had a voice in the party either anymore, nor did she feel like the party spoke for her or our family's values. And at the end of the day, we had to face a hard question about whether or not we would feel comfortable taking our new daughter to a Republican rally. I went to my first Trump rally. I wouldn't want my daughter to be in that room. And it is a sad moment to recognize that. I hope to find inspiration in a political party in the future, and I would hope that it might be the Republican Party again. This is not a complete rejection of what could be, but for where we are right now, it's not a place that I want to call my political home.
So this wrenching sort of civil war, if you will, that's going on in the Republican Party is playing out in some ways in the Democratic Party. You've got Michelle Obama sticking with when they go low, we go high. Eric Holder saying, no, when they go low, we've got to get down and kick them. Where do you see both sides going in terms of what's pulling them apart?
The general larger divide, and you see this both among Democrats and among the Republican Party, is between people who focus more on sort of being part of the global community versus the individual country itself. In the Republican Party, this is much more pronounced. We see Trump sort of moving back from international alliances. We see him focusing on reinventing the NAFTA trade agreement, criticizing the United States' relationship with major trading partners, particularly Canada and the EU, with this focus on sort of America alone. And that's a key division within the Republican Party. You can pretty safely figure out where a Republican is based on where they are on trade. It's a strong leading indicator of whether someone is going to be pro-Trump or anti-Trump. We see those same global economic issues also materializing on the Democratic side, where on the one hand you have folks like John Kerry, the Obamas, who pushed very hard for more involvement in the world, particularly Obama's advocacy for trade with Asia, East Asia, versus people like Bernie Sanders, other more left-leaning politicians who have deeper concerns about those international alliances, about the United States having an expansive trade policy, having a more energetic national security policy, larger United States presence in places like the Middle East, particularly Syria. And that's a big divide that exists in both parties, and it's something Trump has been able to capitalize on. It sort of helps us make sense of why politics are working the way they are right now.
Have both parties ever been going through such internal, I mean, turmoil is too weak of a word. They're really at war with themselves. Has that ever happened in both parties at the same time?
Well, it certainly happened in the 1850s when the Democrats were in turmoil, and then the Whigs were in such turmoil that they disappeared, and out comes the new Republican Party. So, I mean, I think to me the real question for the Democrats right now, can they provide a story for people? They've got a majority out there that seems to want to have this change take place. And if they don't come to the polls, if they don't vote, it's a collective mirror on ourselves. I mean, I think the Republicans won the Kavanaugh battle in many ways, not just getting him confirmed, but they told a story that appealed to their base. And somehow the Democrats haven't been able to do that, except for the gender problem right now, which has been escalated by this. So this way we remind us of the gender thing. But whoever tells a story, and October is a really important time. There's often surprises, something changes, and the Democrats have to be careful that their story is one that people want to, they want to wake up in the morning and maybe not have to think about this sort of stuff. They want to wake up in the morning when there's not a new scandal. They want to wake up in the morning and have somebody in the presidency who they can be proud of. I mean, normally economics votes would carry in a presidential election, but in a midterm, it's how you feel about the president that's really important. And so even though we don't have that other person out there who might be the president, you can imagine somebody that might make us proud again to be Americans.
Do you think that it's a fair critique to say that Democrats haven't sort of realized their potential? You talk about, I mean, there's 60% of Americans who don't approve of this president. Do you think Democrats have made the best use of the last 2 years?
I'm not sure they have. I mean, if there's now some polls wondering whether these people are going to come to the polls, why have they not been energized all along? I mean, the registration battle should have been going on. I think they have, but if they don't, then it's going to be the Democrats' fault. This is theirs to lose. And if they lose, it's going to be a reflection on them. And they're not taking the reins when they have a potential.
Let me give you last word, Elise. Our friend and colleague Joe Scarborough tweeted, "Note to Democrats, please do your part in keeping the most divisive figures in your party out of the news for 22 days. It just can't be that hard."
He's dead on.
Republicans trying to help him, right?
I mean, like, all
help
these
us, help you.
We're like, please, let's just tell you. This is what really gets our people worked up.
Right.
I think to Doris's point about telling a story, and Democrats haven't identified their story, Donald Trump is telling a story every day. It's a story that you reject. It's a story that David Jolly rejects. It's a story that I reject. But he's telling that story. And until, in the absence of that, Joe's point is referencing probably Elizabeth Warren yesterday, putting out the video about her 1,000th Cherokee ancestry that became the source of the debate in a weird numeric race debate and didn't really set the record straight about Donald Trump being mean and misogynistic to her, and it just became a whole other issue into itself and was, I would say, a communications and just political disaster. So that, if they could stop those bombs and just detonating themselves, maybe they would get somewhere.
All right, and it reminds me of, I think it was Jerry Maguire. Help us, help you. My thanks to Emily Jane Fox and Doris Kearns Goodwin, whose new book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, is a must-read. When we come back, Donald Trump seems to be taking his side job as part-time spokesman for Saudi Arabia quite seriously. We'll show you his latest on-message defense of the kingdom. In today's coincidence news, just hours after Trump floated the idea that Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi was potentially murdered by rogue killers, it seems the Saudi government is planning to give an explanation that absolves the Crown Prince, MBS, of any blame. NBC News reporting that the Saudis will claim Khashoggi did die in their consulate in Turkey, but it was an interrogation attempt gone wrong. And just a short time ago, Trump checked in with his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who's in Riyadh today, tweeting, "Just spoke with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who totally denied any knowledge of what took place in their Turkish consulate. He was with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, during the call and told me that he has already started and will rapidly expand a full and complete investigation into this matter. Answers will be forthcoming shortly." Joining us on set now is former CIA director, now NBC News senior national security analyst John Brennan. We've been dying to talk to you about this for days. First, your thoughts on Donald Trump previewing the Saudi line on rogue killers before even the Saudis trotted that out.
Well, I'm sure that Donald Trump has been talking to his national security team, and they've been floating ideas about what possibly could be the explanation for this, as well as what could be a possible explanation of what happened despite the facts and the reality. So this idea of rogue killers is one that probably was bandied about. I don't believe for a moment the fact that this took place inside of a Saudi diplomatic mission in Turkey, and there were plane loads of Saudis that went there. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, has a stranglehold over the Saudi government security and intelligence apparatus. I find it so far-fetched that anything like this could happen without his intimate knowledge and approval beforehand.
And you aren't suggesting, former intelligence officials have said that there's not much likelihood that his PDB said one scenario is rogue killers. You're saying that one of the explanations his national security advisors may have told him to expect from MBS was that it was a rogue element in the security force?
Yeah, I don't know what he was told by his national security team and by the intelligence officials that he's been talking to, but I can imagine that in conversations that this idea of rogue killers, either as the actual reason or as an excuse, as one that's been raised.
I want to read you something that Bruce Rydell writes. Murder in the Middle East. For the last 4 years, MBS sought to portray himself as a reformer who understands the kingdom must change to survive. He allowed women to drive and open the country to concerts, wrestling, and movies. The intense and expensive lobbying campaign worked with many, and the prince was lauded from Boston to San Francisco. Donald Trump hailed him as a reformer before the UN. The mirage is now shattered. The Crown Prince is a reckless and dangerous disruptor. He shakes down his subjects for their wealth detains women activists who demand rights, mutes the former Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef in house arrest, and tries to bully countries from Canada to Lebanon. The pattern of behavior has been obvious for years, but the veil only fell in Istanbul.
Well, I think he can be both. I think he can be a reformer as well as a ruthless authoritarian leader. And he has done some reforms inside of Saudi Arabia in terms of allowing women to drive, saying that movie theaters are going to open, limiting the prohibitions against mixed-sex gatherings inside of Saudi Arabia. And I do think he has a vision. That's his 2030 ambitious program to try to diversify the Saudi economy, bring additional investment in, and to bring elements of Saudi Arabia into the 21st century that are not there yet. At the same time, he is somebody who is, I would say, drunk on power. He is very aggressive in terms of what he's doing. He has eliminated all rivals within the royal family, moving his uncle first out of the Crown Prince perch, that was Prince Mukrin, and then his older cousin, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef. I think he has had this in mind for quite a number of years. He is the favorite son of a very senior prince formerly, and now the king. And I think he's been used to getting his way for many, many years. And once he was able to consolidate power in his own hands and remove any rivals within the royal family councils, I think he was the one who was deciding how Saudi Arabia's future course should be charted.
You said he could be a reformer and, you know, essentially the ruthless leader who carried out this attack on the Washington Post columnist. Do you think that the reformer was spin? Do you think that was presentation to win over hearts and minds in Hollywood, where he invested in the biggest industry in Los Angeles, entertainment, to win hearts and minds in Silicon Valley, where he made big investments in the tech industry, to win hearts and minds in New York's elite circles, to win hearts and minds in this White House, which doesn't sound like it was particularly challenging with Jared Kushner and the president?
Again, I think it can be both. I think he firmly believed, and I had conversations with him about the need to reform Saudi society. And so I think he was very interested in making some changes that were fundamental to Saudi Arabia's future, and also trying to reduce the influence of Islamic extremists within Saudi institutions. At the same time, though, I think he leveraged that as a way to appeal to those quarters that you pointed out and try to attract more interest in what he is doing. Also, I think it was a way to gather public support inside of Saudi Arabia for his leadership. And so he was appealing to some of the younger segments within Saudi society who saw him as a reformer and liked the idea of opening up some things. But he was very, very scrupulous as far as not allowing that reform to go beyond what he wanted. That's why he arrested a number of these women activists who were criticizing him for what he was not doing.
Who lobbied for the reforms that he ultimately
yes. And so he wants to reform, but he wants to reform at his pace and in his way and in a limited manner so that there's no opposition that can develop against him. And so these are all the traits of an authoritarian ruler. And he really did have a total monopoly on military, security, intelligence powers within Saudi Arabia.
I want to stay on that because you've forgotten more about the kingdom than any of us watching will ever know. But the people that he put on house arrest, they're the kinds of folks that the U.S. government, Democratic and Republican presidents, work closely with. And they were largely in charge of security and intelligence, right? So is there any chance that if he jailed the previous people to oversee security and intelligence, that he wasn't intimately involved in all security and intelligence operations like the one that resulted in Jamal Khashoggi's death?
I cannot see it as possible that he was not the person who was aware of and authorized this operation. Whether or not it went badly and they weren't planning to kill him, I don't know. But for something of this magnitude, going after a U.S. person, a journalist for the U.S. resident, a journalist for the Washington Post at a foreign diplomatic mission, a Saudi diplomatic mission in a foreign country, he should have realized, and I think everybody in Saudi Arabia would have realized that this is a major, major action. And I don't believe any of the heads of security services or intelligence services would have done this without the explicit direction and authorization from Mohammed bin Salman.
I asked a former intelligence official why, and he said because he can. Is that your assessment?
I think he certainly has felt emboldened over the past several years because he's been so successful in consolidating power. He also is feted and given all these accolades whenever he goes around, whether it be in Europe or the United States, and everybody caters to him. And I think that has really inflated his sense of power and felt as though he could do these things, and also a very close relationship that he has developed with Donald Trump as well as with Jared Kushner. I think he felt that that U.S.-Saudi relationship then could withstand any type of little, speed bump that this might cause. And I think he very badly miscalculated.
Why? You think Donald Trump's going to turn on him? How was the Trump-Kushner relationship a miscalculation? They've got his back, even as the Saudis get ready to concede that they may be responsible or culpable for Khashoggi's death.
I have great confidence in my former colleagues at the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community to uncover what actually happened here. And although Donald Trump and others in the administration may try to cover it up in some way, it's really going to be up to the congressional intelligence committees to demand immediate briefings from CIA and others about what we know and what MBS's role was in that. So I don't think, in fact, MBS is going to get out of this predicament. In fact, in many respects, I think the Saudi government has to decide between Mohammed bin Salman and the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And the U.S.-Saudi relationship has been fundamental to the kingdom for the past 85 years since its founding.
Got them through 9/11?
It did. Now the question is, who can actually challenge MBS within the family? King Salman, who I always thought was a very fair and judicious individual, and he had responsibility for meeting out. And so now who within this environment of the Royal Family Council is going to be able to be the independent voice that is going to be able to tell King Salman, your favorite son, Mohammed bin Salman, authorized this awful, atrocious, and very reckless action that now is putting at great risk the relationship with the United States.
Libby, can I press you on, I mean, we've had so many conversations about Congress not doing their oversight role. What gives you faith that Congress and Republican control will exercise their oversight role over the intelligence community and suss out what the intelligence community knew and try to isolate Trump and Kushner as outliers by towing the Saudi line?
Well, I've heard now from Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham and others, senior members of the Senate, Republican members of the Senate, who are outraged and who are determined to get to the bottom of this. And so I do hope that they're going to draw the line at this and hold not just the Saudis and Mohammed bin Salman to account, but also the Trump administration, and not let the Saudis get away with what appears to be the killing of a U.S. person, a permanent resident of the United States, and a journalist for the Washington Post. They cannot get away with this. And I think that this is basically the downfall of Mohammed bin Salman.
Do you think Donald Trump is participating in a cover-up?
I don't know. I certainly hope not. And this is where the congressional committees of intelligence jurisdiction are going to be so critically important, because they need to get to the bottom of what the intelligence community knows. And I am certainly confident that my former colleagues at CIA and others are going to speak truth to power here. They need to speak truth to the White House, but they also need to tell the congressional committees exactly what they know.
You should tell the American people, too, I hope.
I think ultimately this is going to come out. It's very important for us to maintain good relations with Saudi Arabia. And if it's Mohammed bin Salman who's the cancer here, well, we need to be able to find ways to eliminate the cancer and to move forward with this relationship that is critical to regional stability and our national security interests.
Thank you so much for being here. It's worth the wait. Up next, the panel weighs in on all this after the break. Trump going on the defensive this morning as the controversy around Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance continues to develop. Tweeting, quote, "For the record, I have no financial interest in Saudi Arabia or Russia for that matter. Any suggestion that I have is just more, wait for it, fake news, of which there is plenty." But it's not only the so-called fake news outlets that are drawing attention to his Saudi connections. Earlier today, even the research team at Fox News tweeted out a list. There it is. The panel's still here. This is a crisis that the White House may not feel today. The president obviously feeling, a lot of swagger, attacking Stormy Daniels, attacking Elizabeth Warren. But this could be a slow burn and really undermine everything he's trying to do on the world stage. That Saudi bet was the first foreign policy bet they made. I went down to the White House, went to all the briefings. This was the first country they visited. They knew how to press all of his buttons. They projected his face onto the side of it. I mean, they have played him like a fiddle. And if this blows up, I'm not sure what his foreign policy credential is.
One of the most important indicators from today about the direction this is heading and the trouble this is going to create for the White House is the fact that Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, one of the president's favorite golfing companions, went on Fox News and lambasted Mohammed bin Salman, suggesting he potentially needs to go, needs to leave his position of authority within the Saudi monarchy. I spoke earlier today with a person close to the Saudis' lobbying operation in Washington who said his clients were apoplectic when they saw that Senator Graham had made those comments. He specifically said the Saudis know the only show the President Trump watches is Fox and Friends. Fact check, may not be accurate, but we know he watches that show. And the Saudis are very aware of the fact that Graham is making these comments. Now, does that mean the White House is going to shift its position on Saudi anytime soon? I doubt it. These relationships are just too close. And the fact that the president has been a vocal defender, to the extent that he can, of Mohammed bin Salman over the last week or so is really telling. That said, Graham's criticism is an important moment and the strongest indicator, if any, that things may be changing in the White House.
Elise, I keep thinking that you can't take the scandal out of the climate, and the climate is one where Donald Trump warmly embraces Vladimir Putin, Duterte, MBS, dictators and authoritarian leaders, and trashes journalists.
If I had to predict, I would say that Donald Trump is going to dig into this, as we've seen in his initial comments about trying to deflect from the assumptions of Saudi guilt. He has done the same thing with the Russians and with the interference during the election. He simply digs in deeper and always is on the defensive towards despot pals. And so I don't see that posture changing, especially given the unknowns when it comes to his financial dealings, when it comes to Jared Kushner's financial dealings. I did think it was noteworthy that Jared Kushner wasn't present today, and he had Mike Pompeo absorb the brunt of having that visual with the Saudis in the aftermath of this tragedy.
David Jolly, your thoughts on Jared Kushner and Donald Trump's business relationship being part of this story, a legit foreign policy crisis for any White House?
It's undoubtedly an influence, but listen, Mohammed bin Salman is the perfect corollary on the world stage to Donald Trump. They both emerged more as a political brand than they did because of their political leadership. And to the point of Lindsey Graham speaking out, that is critically important because Lindsey Graham is very close to the kingdom. Lindsey and I met with the Crown Prince at the Crown Prince's residence in Saudi Arabia, along with 2 other senators and 2 other House members, as he was ascending to this role. And he was seen as this emerging Western-friendly brand of political leadership coming out of the Middle East that we could work with. In reality, though, we have seen a continuation of abuse of human rights. We have seen Yemen. We have now seen this, what will certainly prove out to be a murder that he had knowledge of. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump, to the director's point, has to choose between our relationship with Saudi Arabia or his relationship and Jared's with the Crown Prince. And that's where the tension will arise. The most dangerous thing we saw today, though, is this: an affirmation of the president willing to lie in moments of critical global national security. What he did by simply repeating the Crown Prince's talking points to the American people suggests that in moments of national security crisis, our own president cannot be trusted.
Do you agree with that? And let me just add to this, Ronald Reagan's version of this was trust but verify. Other presidents have had healthy skepticism, even with countries that we must have a positive and productive relationship with. I mean, where do you grade Donald Trump in his dealings with Saudi Arabia in the hours and days since we've learned of Jamal Khashoggi's death and disappearance?
Well, I think it's consistent with his previous sort of attitude in these things. First of all, deny any personal role or involvement. And I wouldn't be surprised if MBS has been watching Donald Trump on the world stage for the past 19 months or so, where you deny, and go on the offensive. And unfortunately for MBS at this point, I don't think there is an offensive that is going to be believable. And that's why I think the outrage expressed by the senators, Republican senators, Graham, Rubio, and others,